In the video, Roger described the kind of life that I believe a lot of us live, or at least most people live, a reactionary life. A reactionary life. I think many of us spend our days going through the motions of doing the things that we have to do to fulfill the obligations that are expected of us, just to survive day to day. And along the way, we just merely react to the curves and bumps, as Roger put it, that come along the way. And so I think the typical reactionary life sounds something like this. I have to get out of bed because I have to get ready, because I have to go to work, because I have to eat, and I have to put a roof over my head, and I have to provide for my family. And right now, I have to drive fast because I got stopped by a train that was stopped at the crossing, and I got a flat tire, and now I'm running late, so I have to drive fast. And then I have to mow the lawn tonight when I get home from work because I have to go to that thing tomorrow night, and I've got that other thing that I have to do this weekend, and so on and so forth. Does that sound like anybody's life that you know? Okay, yeah. The picture I get in my mind of the reactionary life is something like this next slide. It's like being a billiard ball on a table, a billiard ball or a billiard table of life, and you're just trying to get from point A to pocket B, and the whole time you've got all these other balls that are moving and bouncing and colliding and ricocheting and knocking us off our path. And our lives of just simply trying to get from here to there, become lives of just constant and unintentional reaction. Meaning we're not planning these trajectories, we're just bouncing around, reacting to whatever's coming our way. And so somewhere then, in the midst of the chaos of constant, collision and constant reaction, we die. We die. Yeah, that's life, right? I think that's a good picture of the reactionary life, the kind of life that many of us live. But I would guess if someone were to ask you the question, well, what is your philosophy of life? I doubt that any of us would say, well, I'm a philosophical reactionist. I believe that life is nothing more than random particles in motion colliding with other random particles in motion, knocking us in random, unpredictable trajectories, and then we die. Right? I doubt any of us would say that. I bet most people don't consciously make their day-to-day decisions by that philosophy, that it really doesn't matter, it's all random. But the truth is, I think that most of us live lives unconsciously by that philosophy. We just react. We just react, doing whatever it is that we have to do just to survive the randomness of life. Does that feel pretty real? Does that feel pretty real? Yeah, I think for a lot of us, that feels pretty real. Well, maybe if it doesn't feel real, if reactionism really doesn't describe your life, you might be able to recognize yourself in some of these other popular, common philosophies of life by which many people live. A lot of people live lives that would suggest that their answer to the question, what on earth am I here for, is, next slide, party, right? You know some people like that? You maybe be a people like that. Life is a party. And those who live by the philosophy that life is a party, basically believe that the purpose of life is pleasure. It's to have fun. It's to be entertained, to feel good. This philosophy of life is articulated in the well-known phrase, if it feels, what? Good. Do it. If it feels good, do it. Now, I think we all know a lot of people like that, but I think probably many of us would say, but that's not me. I am not the party animal kind of person. I'm not the kind of person who bounces from buzz to buzz or from bar to bar or from bed to bed in pursuit of pleasure as what gives my life meaning. And that may be true. That doesn't describe who you are. But try this on for size, okay? Let's take an experiment. Try this on for size. Maybe we are the kind of people, maybe you are the kind of person who bounces just from diversion to diversion. You bounce from distraction to distraction, from job to job, from friendship to friendship, from relationship to relationship, from marriage to marriage. And why do we bounce constantly? Because we're bored. We're just not having fun. This isn't fun anymore. Maybe you can identify yourself in just existing through the weekdays of your life, living weekend to weekend, so you can go out and have some fun. Everybody's working for the weekend. Never mind. Everybody, name it. Who did it? Who did I didn't hear it. Loverboy, okay. $10,000 in the Brooklyn Bridge, right over here. Everybody's living for the weekend so we can go out and have some fun. Maybe you recognize yourself in just surviving and enduring whatever it is that you have to do during the day so that at night we can surf the channels to find something that'll amuse us. To get through our days and nights so we can get to the weekend, so that we can find what is the latest release in Redbox or Netflix, so that we can find something that amuses us, right? Does that sound maybe like, oh, that's hitting a little bit closer to home? A lot of us may fall victim to this philosophy of life that I exist for pleasure, to have fun, to be entertained. It reminds me, speaking of another old song, a lot of us live our lives, like the line from the Nirvana song, here we are now, entertain us. Here I am, world, entertain me. Well, that's a popular philosophy of life. We may recognize ourselves in there, spending a lot of our time and energy and money pursuing pleasure or fun or entertainment or amusement as that which gives our lives meaning. Well, if that doesn't resonate with you, you might be able to identify with this common purpose in life. A lot of people live lives not so much in conscious pursuit of pleasure, but I would suggest in unconscious pursuit of relief from pain. In unconscious pursuit of relief from pain. Our bodies hurt, and we just want to find the right concoction or the right cocktail to get some relief. Our relationships are broken, our relationships are hurt, and our hearts are these gaping open wounds, that are just hemorrhaging. Our hearts are hemorrhaging, and our life has subsequently become the search for a fix that will make it all go away. Our souls ache. Our souls ache, and we don't even know it. We only know that we just need something that will take the edge off. A lot of people live their lives in just pursuit of relief from pain. And interestingly, if you think about this, pain relief as a philosophy of life often looks from the outside. Pain relief as a philosophy of life often looks from the outside very similar to the life of pleasure pursuit. We bounce from buzz to buzz. We bounce from bar to bar. We bounce from bed to bed. But in pursuit of something that will just anesthetize the pain that has become my life. That maybe sound like somebody you know. Well, there are several other practical and popular philosophies of the meaning of life that we could look at, but I think that one of the last and most common and popular pursuits of meaning in life is possessions. Possessions. We go to the next slide. A lot of us spend our time and our energy and our money and our lives just with the desire to acquire. The craving to collect, the craving to consume. What is going to give my life meaning? What is going to make me happy? More stuff. More stuff. And we find purpose in pursuing the latest and the greatest and the biggest and the best and the newest and the fastest and the sleekest and the plushest. Does that sound like anyone you know? Sounds like almost every American I know. It certainly sounds like the owner in this, of all this stuff. I mean, let's face it. This is like the, I don't know what this is. This is like the holy grail of stuff. He's got an RV pulling a trailer full of toys, including a little personal mini helicopter. Does life get any better than this? Yes, it does. We could get more toys. We could get a jet ski on there, and we could get a motorcycle on there, and then a four-wheeler on there, and a right? Of course. Life can get better with more stuff. You've seen the bumper sticker or the license plate frame that articulates this philosophy of life. He who dies with the most toys, he wins. But the problem with that philosophy, as we see in the next slide, is he who dies with the most toys still dies. And you ain't taking it with you. That U-Haul is doing him no good. I don't care if it's got a mini helicopter in there. It ain't going with them. So whatever philosophy of life you've been living by, whether it has been just reactionism or the pursuit of pleasure or relief from pain or possessions or some other philosophy, it's not too late for you to discover that God holds the purpose for your life. God holds the purpose for your life. And it doesn't matter if you've been traveling down the wrong road of life for a long time or if you're in the early stages of your journey in life. There is still time, and this is the good news, to get on the right path. And I really appreciate, Roger's candidness in the video, his transparency in sharing his realization that as he's approaching retirement and what he called the twilight years, of a reactionary life, that he's finding himself asking the question, well, what now? What now? I've been focusing my life on my career, and I've been focusing on my family, but somewhere along the line, I feel like I've really missed what is God's plan for my life. What on earth am I here for? And that's the fundamental question of life that everyone is asking and that we're addressing in this 7-week message series by this name. What on earth are we here for? And this morning, just by way of introduction to the next 7 weeks, I want to look at what the Bible has to say in Ephesians 2, chapter 10. Ephesians 2, chapter 10. Let's read this passage together. For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. And so what we get in these words is God's perspective on the meaning and the purpose of our lives. What we see in these words is God's answer, God's personal answer to your question, God, what on earth am I here for? And the first truth that God says about you in this verse is, you are my masterpiece. We go to the next slide. You are my masterpiece. Let's personalize that by reading that top caption together. I am God's masterpiece. That's what God says about you. This is a truth that gives your life meaning. Now, in your notes, by the way, there are sermon notes in the bulletin if you want to follow along there. I've put the original biblical Greek word, or at least an English transliteration of the original Greek word that is translated by the word masterpiece. Did that make sense? I don't think that. The word masterpiece is a translation of the original Greek word that's written in your notes, poema. Now, what does it look like? If you see it there in your notes, what does it look like and sound like? Poema. Yeah, poem. It is the word from which we get our English word poem. And this verse is telling us that you are God's poem. You are God's masterpiece poem. Now, if any of you have ever taken time to write a poem, a serious one, not like a roses are red, violets are blue, Some poems rhyme, but this one don't. Not like that kind of poem, but a serious one. Then if you've ever taken time, then you understand something of the fact that a poet invests time in meticulous effort, just selecting the right word, just putting this poem together so that it uniquely and perfectly, captures the creativity of the poet, the passion of the poet, and the purposes that poet has in creating this work of art. If you've ever written a poem, you understand that a poet pours something of himself. He pours something of herself into each of his or her works of art. Well, guess what? God says, you are my poem. You are my masterpiece poem. And so this means that God has written into the fabric of who you are. God has written into the fabric of your life something of himself, and something that uniquely and perfectly captures his creativity and his passion and his purposes. You are a masterpiece poem. How's that feel? Does that feel pretty real? I'm not seeing a bunch of nods. Yeah, I think a lot of us, maybe thinking, wow, if I'm God's poem, I think I'm like God's haiku. Do you remember haiku from like grade school or wherever we had to learn about haiku? It was like this Japanese poetic form that really doesn't make sense to anybody but the Japanese. Yeah, here's a haiku for you. I'm not making this up. At the age-old pond, a frog leaps into water, a deep resonance. That's it. It's like, what? That didn't even rhyme. What's with that? Right? And I think that's how some of us feel about our lives. If I'm God's poem, I'm like a haiku. A poem that just doesn't make any sense. There's no rhyme or reason to why I was written. What's that all about, God? Anybody relate? Yeah, any haikus out there? Yeah, a couple haikus. A deep resonance. That was a reference back to the haiku. I don't know if you missed that. All right. Well, here's the truth. God doesn't write worthless poetry. God does not write worthless poetry. You are not a worthless, senseless, meaningless poem that has no rhyme or reason. Well, how can you know that? How can I say that so confidently? Well, for this reason. And Steve was talking about this in the communion devotional. Because Jesus did not die a brutal death on a cross for worthless poems. If you look at Jesus on the cross with his arms outstretched, he's saying to you, this is how valuable you are. This is how much I love you, my masterpiece poem. You are to die for. Jesus would not die for a worthless haiku. You are a masterpiece poem. That's how you know that you are significant. And you're not a worthless poetry because God is not a worthless poet. God doesn't write worthless poetry. You are a masterpiece. So say that with me again. I am a masterpiece. I am a masterpiece. And I want you to just rehearse that truth as you leave here today, as you face whatever it is that you face during the course of an ordinary week. I am God's masterpiece. I am a masterpiece poem. And why is that so important? Because if you believe that you're worthless and meaningless and your life is senseless, well, guess what? You're going to live a life and treat your own life the way you would treat anything that you think is worthless and senseless. Right? What do you do with worthless and senseless things? You pitch them. They're disposable. And if you believe that you are worthless and senseless, you are going to live a disposable life. In 25 years of being a pastor, I've seen a lot of people who are living disposable lives because deep down in their heart, they believe they're worthless. They're meaningless. There's no rhyme or reason to their life. But the truth is, God's perspective, God sees you differently, and he says, you are my masterpiece. You are my masterpiece poem, and that gives our lives value. So that's our first truth from Ephesians 2:10. The second truth that God says about you in this verse is, I created you for a good purpose. I have a good purpose. Let's say that together. I have a good purpose. So I am a masterpiece. I am God's masterpiece, and I have a good purpose. And it's very clearly stated in these words, the second part of Ephesians 2:10, God has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he has planned for us long ago. The good things he planned for us long ago. You and I are God's masterpiece. And as I said, that gives our lives value. I know I'm loved because I'm a masterpiece poem. Excuse me. But what gives our lives purpose, what gives our lives significance, is when the poetry of our lives is having the impact on others, and when it's having the impact in the world that the master poet intended for it to have. Does that make sense? That's when we find our meaning, our significance, our purpose. Value is found in being loved. Significance and purpose is found in, discovering and seeing the poetry of my life affect the world in the way that the poet intended for it to affect the world. This verse tells us the master poet wrote your life. He composed the lines of your life to accomplish good things in the world. Good things that he planned even before you were born, long ago. And so there are a couple quick implications that I just want to tease out from this truth that we're created for a good purpose. And we're actually going to spend the rest of the 7-week series, going into deeper, taking a deeper look at each of these truths. But I just want to highlight a couple implications of this truth right now, that we were created by God for a good purpose. So first of all, this is the truth, that we discover the significance and purpose then of our lives in outward movement. Let's read that together. We discover the significance and purpose of our lives in outward movement. In the same way that a poet creates a masterpiece poem and intends for it to be something that blesses the world. He intends for it to be, or she intends for it to be, a gift to the world. So too did God intend the poetry of your life to be a blessing and a gift to the world. No poet, pours his heart and his creativity and his passion and his purposes into a poem and is satisfied with sticking it in a book on a shelf. That's why I did that. Right? Well, neither did God compose the poem of your life so that you would sit uselessly on the shelf of life. That's not his purpose in making you a masterpiece poem. And so the significance of our lives, the purpose of our lives, the answer to the question for each and every one of us, what on earth am I here for, can be discovered and only be discovered in outward movement, in getting off the shelf of life and seeing the impact that the handwritten, by the hand of God, poetry of our lives does when people read it and see it and hear it. So God didn't put us on this planet just to breathe and take up space and die. God didn't put us here to be consumers. He put us here to be contributors. We discover the significance and purpose of our lives in outward movement. Now we're going to spend one entire Sunday just really unpacking that idea in greater detail in a couple weeks. But this is a second implication. Go to the next slide. We discover the significance and purpose of our lives in connection with others. So let's read that together. We discover the significance and purpose of our lives in connection with others. We discover the purpose of the God-written poetry of our lives in community with other people. In the same way, just teasing out the same poetry analogy, in the same way that a poem has no impact when it's isolated from a reader, right? Are there any poems that you have never read, never heard, never seen, never heard described that have really deeply moved and affected your life? No! A poem has no impact when it's isolated from an actual reader, and so too it is impossible for the God-written poetry of your life to fulfill its God-intended purpose for your life and God's intended purpose for the world if it's completely isolated from other people. Does that make sense? That's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. You cannot fulfill God's purpose for your life by yourself. It's impossible. We can't discover God's answer to the question, what on earth am I here for, in isolation. We can only answer this fundamental question of the meaning of life in connection with other people. God's calling. That's just another fancy Bible word for saying, God's design, his composition of your life, the unique composition of your life as a masterpiece poem. That's his calling. God's calling and community go together. They are inseparable. And that's why we talk so much about being involved in life groups here in this church. It's why we say that connecting with others, that grouping together with others is one of the non-negotiable essential marks of the authentic Christ follower. It's just a non-negotiable essential mark of the authentic Christ follower. And that's why we're challenging each and every one of you to make a commitment to join a life group for just 7 weeks. For the next 7 weeks, one of our What on Earth Am I Here For life groups. It's because we discover the impact that the master poet intended for our lives to be. The impact he purposed, the good things that he purposed to come forth out of the poetry of our lives in community. That's where we discover it. All right. I think I can check that point off. Next point. This is the second implication, another implication that we'll spend time on in the weeks to come. Oh, I'm sorry, back up. I guess I did skip that. Previous slide. No, I did say that, didn't I? Where am I? Does anybody know where I am? Oh, yeah, I was talking about tithing. Yeah. I stole that joke from a vineyard pastor this Sunday. It's like, I'm going to steal that. That's great. So you cannot be who God created you to be. You cannot fulfill the good things that God planned for you to fulfill disconnected from others, in isolation. We discover the significance and the purpose of our lives in connection with others, and we'll talk more about that. So God says, you are my masterpiece poem, and I created you for a purpose. I created you to do good things that I planned for your life long ago, long before you're born. And you discover that in outward movement, and you discover that in connection with others. All right? So now we're ready for this next truth. The last truth we see in this verse is, I discover then my purpose in Jesus. I discover my purpose in Jesus. Let's read that together. I discover my purpose in Jesus. We see this truth also in the second half of Ephesians 2:10. He, God, has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. God created us in Christ Jesus. And that means that who we are as a masterpiece poem, handwritten by the master poet himself, is discovered in Jesus. Who we are as a masterpiece poem is discovered in Jesus, and it cannot be discovered apart from Jesus. Right? The purpose of a creation must be discovered in the purposes of the Creator. Does that make sense? I mean, think of it this way. It's like a grade school child who, comes home from school, and some of you have had this experience, and presents to his or her parents, their latest work of art from art class. And the parent looks at it just like, oh, my, what a lovely, paperweight. I will put it on my desk to hold paper. Right? Some of you have had that one too. All right. But if the paperweight If paperweight wasn't the Creator's purpose for that work of art, then something horrible has just happened. Right? If paperweight wasn't the Creator's purpose, then it's a lose-lose-lose situation. The paperweight loses. The creation itself loses and will end up wasting its life, so to speak, not doing what it was created to do. And it's going to feel frustrated. I'm sitting on paper, and this is so unfulfilling. Right? It's not doing what the Creator created it to do. The paperweight loses. The parents lose. Right? The parents lose because the Creator created this creation for good things to come into their lives, for the good purpose. There was a good purpose in this work of art. And the blessing that the Creator intended for his or her work of art is lost, right? And thirdly, the Creator loses. The Creator loses by seeing his or her work of art just wasted. The life of his or her work of art wasted. Seeing his or her work of art just frustrated because it's not doing what it was created to do, right? That makes sense? That analogy makes sense? Yeah. Well, that's exactly how it is with us. A lot of people we know, and maybe we are one of those people that we know. We're trying to eke out some sort of sense of purpose in our lives by holding up the work of art that we've been created to be, but we hold it up to others and say, what on earth am I here for? Tell me, what on earth am I here for? But apart from the Creator's revealed purpose, they don't know either. They don't know either, apart from the Creator's revealed purpose. And so, we look to Hollywood for meaning in life. And we allow Hollywood to turn us into worthless paperweights. We look to celebrity. We look to pop culture. And I'm speaking, in particular to, the younger generation here this morning. We look to celebrity. We look to pop culture for meaning in life, to answer the question, who am I? What am I created for? And they don't know, and they're turning you into worthless paperweights. We look to peers to tell us who we are, and we allow them to turn us into worthless paperweights. We look to lovers to discover, why am I lovable? And we allow them to turn us into worthless paperweights. It's only in relationship with a Creator, with the Creator. It's only in relationship with Jesus that we can discover the answer to the question, what on earth am I here for? What on earth am I here for? If you're trying to be what somebody else wants you to be, if you're trying to be what somebody else thinks you should be or what somebody else thinks you are, you're going to miss the true beauty. You're going to miss the true masterpiece. You're going to miss the true genius of who the master poet created you to be. I discover my purpose in Jesus. Well, that's really the simple foundation that I want to lay down this morning for where we're going to be going in the remaining 6 weeks together. You need to understand, what on earth am I here for? Well, first of all, you are a masterpiece. You are God's masterpiece, created for a good purpose, to have a good impact in the world, to have a good impact on the lives of people around you. And you discover that purpose in Jesus. Simple enough? All right, let's stand.